Hey, deserving listeners, today's episode is on all of the personality disorders. I'm going to talk about all of the personality disorders in this episode, all 10 of the personality disorders in the DSM, plus 4 other personality disorders that are not included in the DSM, but should be. This episode is just for patrons of the podcast, so if you're not a patron, you need to become one to hear this whole episode. This episode is kind of like a continuing education episode for clinicians, and so I thought I would just have it be for patrons of the podcast. I'm going to go into full detail on each. I'm not going to go into, it's not a deep dive for each personality disorder, but it's a deep dive on personality disorders in general. I've spent my entire career studying and treating personality disorders. It's very complicated. I can look back to graduate school and beyond and remember how little I understood about personality disorders early in my career. It's hard to learn, and research shows this, that therapists and clinicians have a hard time understanding personality disorders, and sometimes they don't know that they don't understand personality disorders. I can't remember this one study specifically, the specific percentages, but something like half of clinicians misdiagnosed narcissistic personality disorder, even though it's one of the most common ones. You need to work with these people for months, if not years, to get to know the personality disorder. To really understand it, you have to be with those people, and you have to get to know them inside and out. You can't learn about personality disorders from reading a book or lectures or vignettes. It helps, but you really have to experience these people. And you also have to know what to look for. You know, a lot of these people end up in therapy, and a lot of clinicians are exposed to these people. But unless the clinician knows that this person suffers from the personality disorder, they don't necessarily know what they're looking at. And they're often misdiagnosed and misunderstood. There's a lot of misinformation out there, particularly on the internet. And a lot of clinicians avoid these people because they've been brainwashed into thinking that they're evil or that they're untreatable, and it's just not true at all. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about schizoid, schizotypal, paranoid, antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, histrionic, avoidant, dependent, obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, passive-aggressive personality disorder, psychopathic personality disorder, sadistic, and masochistic personality disorder. And I'm also going to go into detail on the central trauma for each of these disorders, the presentations, the symptoms, and also the countertransference, because that was, I originally started this episode just answering upper tier patron Angela's question about what does countertransference feel like with the various different clusters of personality disorders. And so I was just going to answer it in like a 10-minute format, but I couldn't help myself. As I started looking into it, I was like, I should just do, maybe a little bit more detail, maybe a little bit more. And then before long, I had been thinking and researching and taking notes for, a couple weeks, and a 10-minute episode turned into this. And so we'll see how long this takes. If you're not a patron, go to patreon.com, go to Psychology in Seattle, become a patron of the podcast. You'll get instructions on how to access this episode, along with hundreds of others of our best episodes, in which I go into detail on various different things, including deep dives on some of these disorders. I can't remember my narcissistic personality disorder length, but I think it's like 10 hours long. My histrionic, my borderline, avoidant personality, passive-aggressive, I go into detail on all these. Anyway, so if you're not a patron, do it now. Join us. Do it.